It was late October when I decided to spend a few days alone at a small cabin I'd found online. It was deep in the woods, about an hour from the nearest town, advertised as a quiet retreat for hunters and hikers. I wasn't either of those things, but I wanted silence, no phone service, no traffic noise, nothing. Just me, a few books, and the sound of wind in the trees. I drove up there on a gray Friday morning with my car packed with enough food and water for 4 days. The road narrowed the farther I went, changing from smooth asphalt to rough gravel, and finally to a dirt path filled with ruts and fallen branches. I didn't see another car once I turned off the main road. The cabin sat at the end of that path, surrounded by thick forest. It wasn't large, just one story, a small porch, and a shed off to the side that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The roof had patches of moss, the windows had streaks from rain, and the porch steps sagged a little when I walked up. But it looked solid enough, and the inside was surprisingly clean. There was one main room with a small kitchen area, a table, an old couch, and a bed tucked in the corner. The only light came from 2 windows and a single bulb powered by a small generator outside. The air smelled faintly of pine and dust, the kind of smell that makes you feel like you've stepped away from everything. The first day passed quietly. I unpacked, started a small fire in the wood stove, and sat reading until it got dark. There was no sound except for the occasional creak of the old wooden walls and the wind pressing against them. When night came, it got cold fast. I turned off the generator to save fuel and used a flashlight to move around. Outside, the darkness looked thick, almost solid, and I realized how far I really was from anyone. No lights, no cars, no cell service. Just silence. The second day started fine. I hiked a bit along a narrow trail that ran behind the cabin. It led down to a small stream and curved through dense trees before looping back. I noticed how easy it would be to get lost there. Everything looked the same in every direction. By afternoon, the weather turned cloudy again. The woods went quiet in that way they sometimes do before rain. I went inside, made some coffee, and sat by the window watching the trees sway. That was when I noticed something odd. What looked like a boot print in the soft ground near the shed. It caught my attention because I hadn't been near the shed since I got there, and it didn't look old. The print was sharp, the tread still defined, as if it had been made that morning. I walked outside and checked around but didn't see any others. The ground was firm except for that one spot. I told myself it was probably from the last person who stayed there, maybe days ago. Still, it bothered me enough that I tried the shed door, just to check. It was locked with a rusted padlock. Through the small window, I could see what looked like old tools, maybe a workbench, and a few boxes. Nothing strange, but the place gave me a feeling I didn't like. Something about it felt untouched but watched, as if it was waiting for someone to come back. That night, it rained. The roof rattled and the trees groaned. I lay in bed, listening to the steady tapping against the window. At some point, I heard a dull thump outside. It wasn't thunder, it was too close. Then another, like someone walking slowly across the porch. I held still, waiting, telling myself it was just the wind shaking something loose. The sound stopped after a few minutes, and eventually I fell asleep. In the morning, the rain had stopped, but the ground was soaked. When I stepped outside, I froze. There were footprints in the mud, starting at the edge of the porch and leading around the side of the cabin. They were fresh, larger than my own, and deep, like whoever made them had been heavy or carrying something. The tracks stopped near the shed, right where I'd seen that single print the day before. I walked over carefully, scanning the tree line, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. The woods were still. The shed door was still locked, but now the padlock hung loosely on one side, as if someone had tried to pry it open. The metal was slightly bent. I didn't touch it. Instead, I went back inside and locked the cabin door. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. I kept checking out the window, scanning the trees, but everything was still again, like the forest had gone back to pretending it wasn't watching. By afternoon, I decided I didn't want to stay another night. I started packing up, but when I turned the key in the ignition, the engine didn't even try to start. The battery was completely dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to think. I'd used the car only once since arriving. I shouldn't have died that fast. I didn't have jumper cables or anyone nearby to call. I could have walked out, but the nearest main road was several miles through thick woods, and it was already late in the day. I went back inside before it got dark. The cabin felt smaller that night, like the walls were closing in. I turned on the generator and tried to distract myself by reading, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the wood made me flinch. I kept thinking about those footprints, the damaged lock, and the fact that someone had been there while I was asleep. Around midnight, I heard something again. This time it wasn't just footsteps. It was the crunch of leaves and the faint sound of wood scraping. It came from near the shed. I turned off the light so I could see outside better. Through the window, the woods looked pitch black, except for a small patch the moonlight touched. I could barely make out the shape of the shed, and something moved behind it. Just a flicker of motion, but enough to make my skin crawl. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours, listening. Then came another sound. A slow, dragging noise, metal against dirt. It stopped, then started again, closer this time, somewhere between the shed and the cabin. I backed away from the window and picked up the small hatchet that was hanging by the door. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I waited, trying not to breathe too loudly. The noise circled the cabin, stopping every few seconds. Once, I heard what sounded like a hand brushing against the wall. Then nothing. Silence again. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the first light came, I opened the door. The ground around the cabin was disturbed. Muddy prints everywhere. They led back toward the trees and disappeared. Near the porch, I saw a long scratch mark on the wood, as if someone had dragged something heavy across it. I walked to the shed again. The padlock was gone. The door hung slightly open. Inside, everything was scattered, the boxes overturned, the tools knocked to the floor. But one thing stood out. A sleeping bag rolled up neatly in the corner, one I hadn't noticed before. It looked used. There was an empty water bottle beside it, and an old jacket hung on a nail. Someone had been living in there. The realization made my stomach twist. Whoever had been out there, they'd probably been watching me since I arrived. Maybe they'd been using the shed as shelter, hiding when the cabin got rented out. I couldn't stop thinking about the noise I'd heard that night. The dragging sound. What had they been moving? Why were they circling the cabin? I didn't stay to find out. I packed what I could carry and started walking down the dirt road. It was a long walk, almost 6 miles before I saw another car. I waved it down, and the driver took me to the nearest gas station. When I told the attendant about the cabin, he nodded slowly like it wasn't the first time he'd heard something like that. He said there had been a few complaints before. People saying things went missing, tools left out, signs of someone staying nearby. No one had ever been caught. A few days later, I called the property owner to tell him what I'd found. He said he'd send someone to check it out. I never heard back. But sometimes, when I think about those nights, I can't shake the image of that shed. The sleeping bag, the bent lock, and those heavy footprints in the mud. Whoever was out there, they knew I was alone. They probably watched me unpack, sit by the window, even sleep. I still don't know what they wanted or why they didn't try to get inside that night. Maybe they were just waiting, trying to decide if I'd leave soon, or maybe they were looking for a chance. All I know is that I'll never rent another cabin that deep in the woods again. Every time I think of that place, I imagine the shed door swinging slightly in the wind, and someone just standing in the trees, waiting for the next car to come down that long dirt road. It was early November when I decided to rent a small cabin for a few days just to get away from everything. I'd been working too much, barely sleeping, and I wanted quiet. No neighbors, no city noise, no one around. I found the cabin through a listing that looked simple enough. One room, surrounded by forest, with a small lake just a short walk away. It looked peaceful in the photos, almost too peaceful, but that was what I wanted. The drive there took almost 5 hours. The paved road ended after the first 3. Then it turned into a narrow dirt path that cut through dense trees. The forest on both sides felt endless. The farther I went, the more it felt like I was driving away from the world entirely. My phone had lost signal miles back, and by the time I reached the clearing where the cabin stood, The only sound I could hear was the crunch of gravel under my tires. The cabin looked old but sturdy. It was small, built from dark wood that had weathered over the years. The roof slanted slightly, and the front porch sagged in the middle. There was an old rocking chair that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time, and beside the steps, a rusted axe leaned against a stump where someone had once chopped wood. I walked up to the porch, pushed the door open, and was hit with the smell of stale air and pine. Inside, it was exactly what I expected. Bare and quiet. A bed, a wood stove, a small table, and a single window that looked out toward the trees. There was a small cabinet with a few dusty cans and an old kettle on a hook above the stove. I unpacked slowly, trying to get used to the silence. Every movement I made felt louder than it should have been. When I stepped on the old wooden floor, it groaned beneath me. The air was cool, and when I opened the window, the wind carried the smell of damp leaves and earth. For the first few hours, I just sat outside on the porch, listening to the forest. That night, I made a small fire in the stove, ate from a can of soup, and lay on the bed reading until the light faded completely. The only light after dark came from the faint orange glow of the fire and the thin beam of my flashlight. Outside, the forest was completely black. There was no moon, no stars visible through the thick trees. When I turned off the flashlight, I couldn't see my own hand in front of me. The darkness was total, the kind that makes you feel trapped. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't the crackle of the fire or the creak of wood. It was dull and distant, like something heavy brushing against the ground. For a moment, I thought maybe it was an animal outside. Then I heard a faint metallic clink, like something tapping against metal. It was soft, but it didn't stop. My chest tightened as I sat up and listened. It was coming from behind the cabin, near where the small shed was. I remembered seeing it earlier in the day. Small, half covered in ivy, door hanging crooked. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and I sat there in the dark, waiting, not daring to move. When nothing else happened, I told myself it was probably the wind or an animal bumping into something. But I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I went to check the area behind the cabin. The ground was damp from rain the night before. I noticed a few things right away. There were scuff marks near the shed door, small but fresh, and a faint shoe print near the corner of the cabin. I stared at it for a long time. It was definitely a human footprint, the treads still clear in the soft mud. I hadn't walked around there before, and I was wearing boots, not sneakers like the print showed. The shed door was slightly open. I pulled it the rest of the way, and the hinges made a long groan. Inside, it was dark and cold. There were a few rusted tools scattered around, some old boxes and a broken chair, but something looked off. In the back corner, there was a pile of blankets and an empty food wrapper. It looked like someone had been sleeping there not long ago. My stomach sank. I stepped back, scanning the woods, half expecting to see someone watching me. The forest was still, but it didn't feel empty anymore. For the rest of that day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I caught myself glancing toward the trees. The air felt different, heavier. Around evening, I decided to pack up early and leave in the morning. I didn't want to drive the dirt road in the dark, so I tried to calm myself and just wait it out one last night. I made a small fire again, trying to stay busy. When the sun went down, the cold came fast. I locked the door, shut the window, and sat on the bed with my flashlight pointed at the floor. Every small noise made me tense. The wind picked up, and branches scratched against the cabin roof. I tried to tell myself that it was all normal, that being alone just made every sound feel worse than it was. Sometime after midnight, I heard it again. The same metallic clink as before, only this time closer, right outside the wall behind the bed. It was followed by a slow, dragging sound, like something being pulled through wet dirt. Then silence. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned off the flashlight, held my breath, and listened. For several minutes, there was nothing. Then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps moving along the side of the cabin. The wood creaked faintly as if someone had brushed against it. I sat frozen, staring at the door. The sound stopped just outside. I could almost feel the presence of someone standing there, only a few feet away. The seconds dragged on forever. Then the doorknob rattled slightly, just a small twist, but enough to make my whole body go cold. I gripped the handle of the hatchet I'd brought in earlier, my hands slick with sweat. The rattling stopped after a few seconds, and the footsteps moved again, this time away from the door, toward the woods. I waited for a long time before moving. When I finally looked out the window, I saw nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees swaying in the wind. I didn't sleep at all that night. When daylight came, I packed up fast. I barely ate, barely even looked around. I just wanted to leave. Outside, the ground was muddy again from the dew. As I carried my bag to the car, I noticed something on the ground, fresh footprints, leading from the shed to the porch and back again. They were deeper this time, as if whoever it was had been standing there for a while. I didn't waste another second. I started the car and drove off down the dirt road as fast as I could. The whole drive back, I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see someone step out onto the road behind me. When I finally reached the main highway, I felt like I could breathe again for the first time in 2 days. I called the rental company once I got home, told them what I'd seen, the footprints, the shed, the noises at night. The man on the phone sounded surprised at first, then said they'd look into it. That was it. I never heard back. A few weeks later, I looked up the area out of curiosity. There were a few small news articles from the past year, all about people reporting missing items or finding signs of someone staying in cabins that weren't supposed to be occupied. One mentioned a hiker who'd gone missing near that same forest. They found his campsite weeks later, but no trace of him. It's been months now, but I still think about that place. I keep replaying the sound of the footsteps, the way the doorknob moved so gently, as if whoever was out there wasn't trying to break in but just wanted to see if I'd locked it. I think about that pile of blankets in the shed, the empty wrapper, and how close I must have been to whoever was living there. I still don't know what they wanted, if they were just passing through, hiding, or waiting, but what stays with me most is how quiet the forest was that night. Completely silent, except for those slow, careful footsteps moving around my cabin while I sat in the dark, pretending not to breathe. Sometimes I imagine that if I'd fallen asleep, if I hadn't heard the doorknob rattle, maybe they would have tried again. Maybe they would have found a way in. I don't think about it for too long, though, because every time I do, I can still hear that faint metallic clink, somewhere out there in the woods, followed by the sound of something dragging slowly across the ground. It was early October when I decided to spend a weekend at a small cabin deep in the mountains. I rented it from a website that had hundreds of listings, and this one caught my attention because of how isolated it was. It sat right beside a river, surrounded by thick pine woods, about 30 miles from the nearest town. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be completely away from everything. I'd been exhausted from work and needed to clear my head, and that cabin looked perfect for it. The drive there took nearly 4 hours. The last 20 miles were all dirt road, winding through dense forest. I didn't see a single car the whole way in. When I finally arrived, it was around 6 in the evening. The sun had started dipping behind the trees, and the shadows stretched long across the ground. The cabin was smaller than I expected, just one floor, made of dark logs with a tin roof that looked weathered and streaked with rust. A narrow porch wrapped around the front, and the woods came almost right up to the back wall. Inside was basic, one small kitchen area, a wood stove, a single bed, a table, and a chair. The air smelled faintly like old wood and smoke. There was no power, no running water, just a few gas lanterns and a big jug of well water sitting by the counter. There was an outhouse about 30 yards behind the cabin, down a short trail lined with fallen pine needles. The river was maybe 50 feet away, the water low and slow moving, making a faint, steady sound that blended with the wind in the trees. I unpacked my things, lit a lantern, and sat out on the porch for a while. The woods were quiet, almost too quiet. I could hear the river and some distant rustling, but no birds. It was peaceful in a way that made me uneasy. By the time I went inside for the night, the darkness had swallowed everything outside. The kind of darkness that feels thick and absolute. That first night, I had trouble sleeping. The bed creaked every time I moved, and the sounds of the woods grew sharper as the night got deeper. At one point, I thought I heard something walking along the porch, soft, deliberate steps. I froze, holding my breath, straining to listen. The steps were faint, slow, like someone trying not to make noise. Then silence. I stayed awake for hours after that, listening for it again, but nothing came. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been an animal, maybe a raccoon or something brushing against the wood. I made coffee on the small propane stove and sat outside again. The forest looked different in daylight, less threatening, almost peaceful. I decided to walk along the river for a while. The trail was narrow and partly overgrown, but it followed the water upstream. About a half-mile in, I found something odd. There was a spot where the ground looked disturbed, flattened, like something heavy had been sitting there. Beside it, pressed into the damp soil, were two clear footprints. Bare feet, adult-sized. The toes and arches were visible. Whoever it was had been standing there not long ago, maybe that morning. I stood staring at them for a long time. The woods around me were silent. No wind, no movement. I felt a slow chill crawl up my back. I turned around and walked back to the cabin, trying not to look over my shoulder too often. When I got back, I checked around the cabin. I noticed small things I hadn't before. Scratches on the wood of the porch railing, the kind that could have been from a knife or some sharp tool. The dirt near the back steps looked disturbed too, like something had been dragged across it recently. The unease that had been small before started growing into something heavier. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the feeling stayed. That night, I made sure the door was bolted and the windows were latched. I kept a flashlight and the hatchet I'd brought near the bed. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the river outside. The sound of it used to be calming. Now it just reminded me how far I was from anyone else. Sometime after midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, cautious, one at a time. Then the faintest sound of wood creaking under weight. My heart started pounding. I didn't move, just listened. The steps stopped right outside the door. Then there was a sound like breathing. Slow, controlled, right on the other side of the wall. I waited. I could hear it shifting slightly, the faint scrape of fabric or skin against wood. Then silence again. I stayed frozen until the first hint of gray light came through the window. When I finally got up and opened the door, there was nothing there. The ground was wet from dew, but I could see faint impressions in the dirt, bare footprints again. They led from the tree-lean to the porch, but there were no prints going back. I packed my things that morning. I told myself I'd leave early, but I wanted to check the car first. When I opened the driver's side door, my stomach dropped. The passenger seat was covered in pine needles and damp leaves, like someone had opened the door during the night and climbed inside. There were smears of dirt on the dashboard and a faint smell of wet earth. I backed away slowly. I scanned the woods, the porch, the shadows under the trees. Everything was still. My hands were shaking as I started the car. The engine turned over fine, but I couldn't stop looking in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the forest. The dirt road felt longer going out than it had coming in. The trees seemed closer, the turns tighter. Every time I hit a bump, I expected something to appear in the rearview mirror. When I finally reached the paved road, I didn't stop until I saw other cars. That night, I stayed at a small motel just outside the nearest town. Couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the sound of those footsteps, that slow breathing, the footprints leading up but not away. The next morning, I called the property owner. I didn't mention the details. I just said I had to leave early. He told me I wasn't the first. Said people often left that place sooner than planned. I asked him why, but he didn't explain. Just said the woods out there had a way of unsettling folks. I never went back, but a few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked the cabin up again online. The listing was gone. When I searched for it directly, I found a local news article from 2 years before. It mentioned a missing person case. Some man who'd gone camping near that same stretch of river. His car was found abandoned. They never located him, just his gear near an old cabin that matched the one I stayed in. After that, I stopped looking, but every now and then, I still think about the footprints, how there were always two sets going toward the cabin and none going back. Someone had been living out there, watching that place, waiting for anyone who came. When I hear the sound of rain or the creak of wood at night, it brings me back to that silence in the forest, the heavy, watchful kind that hides what's standing just beyond the light. Whoever was out there didn't need to rush. They knew anyone who came to that cabin was already too far from help. And that's what stays with me the most. The quiet wasn't peace. It was patience. I spent most of my life in the city, so when my coworker told me about a small cabin he rented deep in the woods for cheap, I thought it would be a good idea to do the same. I wanted peace, something quiet, somewhere far from everything familiar. I'd been struggling to sleep for months, always feeling tense, always surrounded by noise. The idea of sitting in a cabin surrounded by nothing but trees sounded perfect. I booked it for 5 days in late September. The drive took most of the afternoon. Once I passed the last gas station, the road turned into a long stretch of cracked asphalt, then into a dirt path that wound between thick trees. I didn't pass another car for over an hour. The forest was dense, the trees packed close together like walls, their tops blocking most of the light. The air got cooler as I drove deeper, and I had to roll the windows up because of the smell. Wet soil, pine, and something faintly rotten. When I finally reached the cabin, it was smaller than I expected. It sat on a slope surrounded by tall grass and dark woods, with a thin trail leading to a small lake about 200 feet away. The place looked old but sturdy. Wooden walls dark from rain, a short porch and a tin roof. I parked beside it and stepped out. The air was still. No wind, no birds, no sound at all. Just silence so heavy it felt wrong. Inside, the cabin was simple. One main room with a bed, a small wood stove, a table, a few chairs, and a window that faced the lake. There was no power, just a lantern on the table and some old candles melted halfway down to their holders. There was also a small door in the corner that led to what looked like a storage area, just some empty shelves and a few old cans. I unpacked and started a small fire in the stove. It took a while for the cabin to warm up, and while I waited, I walked outside to look around. The grass behind the cabin was flattened in places, like someone had walked through there repeatedly. At first I thought it might have been animals, but the pattern looked too deliberate, like boot prints spaced apart, all leading toward the tree line. They disappeared into the woods after a few feet. That night, I ate a quick meal, then sat by the stove, writing in a small notebook I'd brought. The light from the lantern flickered against the walls, and for a while, everything felt calm. But around midnight, I heard something outside. It was faint at first, like a slow scrape against wood. I froze and listened. The sound came again, a dull, dragging noise, then a crunch of dry leaves. I turned the lantern down, letting my eyes adjust to the dark, and looked toward the window. Nothing, just blackness. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and I sat there, waiting, not sure if I'd really heard it or imagined it. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had been an animal. I stepped outside after breakfast and checked around the porch. The dirt beneath the window had fresh marks. 2 shoe prints, half-formed but clear enough. I hadn't walked there the day before. They were too large to be mine. The rest of the day passed quietly. I walked to the lake, sat for a while, tried to relax. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the trees like glass. But every time I looked at the forest, I felt uneasy. The shadows seemed too deep, the silence too heavy. Even the birds didn't seem to come close to this place. That night, I decided to stay awake for a while. I kept the lantern low and sat by the window. Around 1 in the morning, I heard it again. The slow scrape, the crunch of dirt, then silence. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see. The lantern's dim light reached only a few feet beyond the porch, then faded into complete black. After a minute, there was another sound. A dull thud against the side of the cabin, near the corner by the storage room. I stared at the wall, every muscle in my body tense. Then came another sound, softer this time. like someone brushing a hand against the wood. Stopped again after that. The rest of the night was quiet, but I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I checked the side of the cabin. The dirt there was disturbed, small patches of loose soil, pieces of bark on the ground. Someone had definitely been there. I followed the faint prints a few feet into the woods until they vanished into the undergrowth. The feeling of being watched crept over me like a weight pressing against my chest. I went back inside, locked the door, and decided to cut my stay short. But when I went to start my car, the engine didn't turn over. The battery was dead. I hadn't used the car lights since I got there, hadn't left anything running. I opened the hood, but I didn't know enough about engines to do anything. The sun was starting to go down, and the road back to the main highway was long. I thought about walking out, but the forest was thick, and I didn't want to get lost in the dark. So I went back inside, locked the door, and waited. That night was worse. The sounds started earlier, around 11. Footsteps, slow, steady, circling the cabin. The boards creaked softly as something moved up the porch steps. Then came a metallic click, like someone testing the doorknob. My stomach twisted. I sat still, barely breathing. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. Then came a faint tap on the window. Just one. I stayed frozen for hours, my eyes fixed on the door. The fire in the stove had burned low, and the cabin was cold, but I didn't move to fix it. Eventually, the sounds faded away, replaced by silence so deep it hurt my ears. When daylight came, I stepped outside again. There were more footprints, deeper this time, circling the cabin. Some led toward the trees, others stopped right by the window. Near the door, I noticed something else. A small pile of wet dirt, as if someone had dug into the ground and scooped it up by hand. There were streaks of mud across the porch rail too, like someone had rested their hand there. I decided to leave that day, car or no car. I packed what I could carry, filled my backpack with water and food, and started walking down the dirt road. It was nearly noon, but the woods felt darker than before. I walked fast, barely stopping to rest. After an hour, I came across a small clearing where the trees opened up just enough for light to pour through. I sat for a minute, trying to calm my breathing, when I noticed something to the left of the trail. A small campfire, burned out but recent. The ashes were still warm. There were footprints around it, the same tread pattern I'd seen by the cabin. Someone had been camping close by. I didn't stay to look longer. I kept walking until I finally reached the main road near evening. I flagged down a passing truck, and the driver gave me a ride into the nearest town. I told him I'd been staying at the cabin by the lake, and he gave me a look I didn't quite understand. He said the old place had been empty for years, except for a few squatters who sometimes stayed out there. When I got back home, I called the company I'd rented from, but the number didn't work. I searched online for the listing, and it was gone. No trace of it. A few weeks later, I found an article from a local paper about an unidentified man living in abandoned cabins near that same lake. The story said he'd been breaking into unoccupied rentals, watching people from the woods, stealing food, sometimes hiding under porches or inside sheds. They hadn't caught him yet. The article didn't show his face, but one detail stuck with me. It said when they searched one of the old cabins, they found piles of dirt under the windows and smudges of mud on the porch rails. Signs that someone had been crouching there, watching inside for hours at a time. Even now, I keep thinking back to that place. The prints in the mud, the tapping on the glass, the quiet breathing I swore I heard near the wall that last night. Whoever it was, they were close enough to touch the window, close enough to see me sitting there in the lantern light, staring out into the dark, thinking I was alone. Sometimes I wonder if they were disappointed when I left early, or if they just waited for the next person to arrive. Because that cabin's still out there, deep in those woods, and someone's been living nearby for a long time. It was in late September when I decided to rent a small cabin deep in the woods for a long weekend. I had been working non-stop for months and needed somewhere quiet to clear my head. I found the place on a small rental website. It was cheap, old, and located beside a narrow dirt road that curved miles away from the nearest highway. There were a few photos, One of the cabin from the outside, one of the inside, showing a small bed, a fireplace, and a table. No cell service, no Wi-Fi. It seemed like the perfect escape. The drive there was longer than expected. The paved road turned into gravel and then to rough dirt. Trees pressed closer to the car the further I went, their tops forming a canopy that blocked out most of the light. The GPS stopped working about 15 miles before I arrived, and I had to rely on printed directions. I remember feeling a sense of relief when I finally saw the small clearing open up between the trees and that weathered wooden cabin standing there, half hidden by brush. The cabin was smaller than I imagined, built from old logs darkened with age. The front porch sagged slightly, and the windows were fogged with grime. A metal chimney stuck up through the roof, rust streaking down its sides. The forest surrounded it so tightly that even during the day, shadows hung around the corners of the building. Inside was simple but livable. A small bed pushed against the back wall, a single wooden chair beside a rough table, a small stove that looked decades old, and shelves with a few dusty cans of food left behind by whoever stayed before me. The air was still, heavy with the smell of old smoke, damp wood, and something faintly sour like mold. Behind the cabin was a narrow path leading to an outhouse about 50 feet away. The trail was lined with pine needles and small animal tracks. I unpacked what I brought: a sleeping bag, a lantern, a small cooler, a knife, and some basic food. By evening, I had the fire going in the small stove, and the air inside warmed up enough to make the place feel a bit less abandoned. That first night was quiet, too quiet. I lay in the bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening to the faint tick of the stove cooling down. Outside, I could hear the soft rustle of wind moving through the trees and occasionally a cracking branch. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. The silence didn't feel natural. It felt like something was holding its breath. I woke up once in the middle of the night to a noise. It was faint, like wood scraping on wood. At first, I thought it was the wind brushing a tree branch against the side of the cabin. But it wasn't rhythmic or random. It came in small, uneven bursts. I stayed still, trying to place it. It stopped after maybe a minute, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I eventually drifted back to sleep, telling myself it was nothing. The next morning, I stepped outside to get some air. The ground was damp from dew, and I noticed something strange in the dirt near the edge of the porch. Shoe prints. They were faint but clear enough to see the tread. They weren't mine. They were larger and spaced wider apart, like from someone heavier. They led from the side of the trees up to the porch, then turned back again toward the woods. I felt my chest tighten a little as I stared at them. I told myself it could have been a hunter or someone hiking through, maybe passing by during the night. Still, the idea that someone had been walking that close to the cabin while I slept didn't sit right. I spent the day trying to distract myself, chopping wood, walking a little along the dirt road, sitting on the porch and reading. Every so often, I'd glance toward the tree line, scanning for movement. The forest looked calm, but something about it felt different from the day before. The quiet seemed thicker. Even the birds that had been chirping earlier were gone. By sunset, the air had turned colder. I made another fire inside, ate some canned beans, and tried to relax. When it got dark, I lit my lantern and sat at the small table writing in a notebook. Around 10 p.m., I heard something again outside, footsteps this time. Not loud, but unmistakable. A few slow crunches on the dirt, then nothing. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for another sound. A full minute passed. Then, faintly, the steps came again, circling around the back of the cabin. The floor creaked slightly as I shifted my weight, but I didn't move closer to the window. I didn't want to draw attention. The steps stopped somewhere behind the cabin, near the outhouse path. After that, silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing against your ears. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the bed, eyes open, gripping the flashlight in one hand. Every sound outside made me tense. I must have dozed off sometime around dawn because when I woke up, sunlight was pouring through the window. The first thing I did was check outside again. The footprints were back, clearer this time, circling the cabin and stopping right by the back wall under the window near the bed. There were also faint impressions near the outhouse path, like someone had been standing there for a while. That was when the reality of it sank in. Someone was watching the cabin. Not a ghost, not an animal, someone real. I looked toward the trees, but everything was still. I packed my bag quickly, thinking I'd leave, but when I went to start my car, it didn't turn over. I checked the hood and saw that one of the battery cables had been pulled loose. The clamp was still there, but the bolt had been completely removed, like someone had done it on purpose. My stomach dropped. Whoever had been outside wasn't just watching. They'd been close enough to my car, close enough to touch it without me noticing. I reattached the cable as best I could with my multi-tool, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone had done it while I was asleep. That evening, I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I sat in the dark, listening. Hours passed. The forest stayed quiet until sometime past midnight. Then, from outside, I heard a faint scraping noise again, metal against wood. I slowly turned my head toward the door, barely breathing. The sound was coming from the doorknob. I could hear it turning slightly, then stopping. Then again, slower, like someone was testing it gently. My heart felt like it was trying to punch out of my chest. I stayed perfectly still. After a few seconds, it stopped. Silence followed. Then, soft steps on the porch moving away toward the woods. I didn't sleep after that. I waited, gripping the hatchet beside me, staring at the door until dawn. When the first light came, I went outside immediately. The dirt around the porch was disturbed. Clear prints leading straight from the trees to the steps. I followed them with my eyes as far as I could, but they disappeared into the dense brush. That was enough for me. I threw my things into the car, forced the engine to start again, and drove out as fast as the road would let me. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station almost 30 miles away. When I finally got out, I realized my hands were still shaking. Later, when I told the owner I was leaving early, he didn't sound surprised. He said something about strange people wandering through that area sometimes. He didn't say much more. I didn't want to know. Weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched for news about that region and found an article from a year before. Something about a missing hiker who had been last seen near that same stretch of forest. His car was found abandoned off the same dirt road. No one ever located him. Sometimes I think about that cabin, about the footprints leading up to it, the sound of the door handle turning in the dark, the silence after. It wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was someone real, someone who knew how far away that place was from everything else. When I remember those nights, what unsettles me most isn't what I heard. It's what I didn't. No running footsteps, no car engine, no proof that whoever was out there ever left. Just that heavy, patient quiet, the kind that tells you you're not alone even when you can't see who's watching. I had been planning a weekend away from the city for months. Just a simple cabin in the woods to disconnect, breathe, and finally rest. I found a listing online for a small, isolated cabin in northern Maine. No internet, no cell service, a river nearby, thick woods all around, a long dirt road that led to the property. The pictures made it look perfect. Cozy, simple, completely cut off from the world. I was desperate for quiet, so I booked it immediately. The drive was long, about 5 hours from my apartment. The last stretch was all dirt and gravel, winding through dense pine forests. The trees leaned in close, brushing the car as I passed. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already low, leaving streaks of orange and purple in the sky. The cabin itself sat in a small clearing, with a narrow trail leading to a river that glistened in the fading light. The place looked older than the photo suggested, but still sturdy. The wood was dark and weathered, the porch sagging in the middle, with a couple of chairs stacked in the corner. Inside, it was simple. One small room with a bed in the corner, a wood stove, a table and a chair. A few dusty shelves lined the walls, holding old canned goods and a kettle. The air was cool, faintly musty, with the scent of pine from the surrounding forest. I unpacked my things, stacked some wood for the stove and made a small fire. The warmth spread slowly, and for a few minutes, I felt a rare kind of calm I hadn't felt in months. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The forest around the cabin felt heavy and still, with no birds, no wind, nothing moving. At one point, I thought I heard a footstep on the porch, but when I froze and listened, there was nothing. I went back to bed, uneasy, and tried to fall asleep. The next morning, I decided to explore the area. I followed the trail behind the cabin toward the river. The path was narrow, lined with pine needles, with signs of animal activity everywhere. Tracks of deer, raccoons, and birds. About halfway to the river, I noticed something strange. The ground looked disturbed, as if someone had been sitting or standing there recently. Beside it, I found faint footprints, barefoot, adult-sized. They led from the trees toward the clearing and stopped. I looked around. The forest was silent, empty, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Back at the cabin, I inspected the porch more closely. There were shallow scratches along the railing, the kind that could have been made by a sharp object. The dirt near the back steps was broken up in a way that suggested movement. Not animals, but something heavier. My unease grew, but I told myself it was nothing. People probably passed through sometimes. That night, I made sure the door was locked and the windows latched. I kept a flashlight and the small hatchet I had brought within reach. Hours passed, and the darkness outside pressed close. Around midnight, I heard it, the scraping of something moving across the ground behind the cabin. I froze, gripping the hatchet. The sound came closer, then stopped, replaced by a faint scraping along the side of the cabin. I stayed perfectly still, listening. The scraping stopped, then came the slow creak of the porch boards. My heart felt like it would burst from my chest. Whoever it was didn't rush, didn't make any noise except that slow, deliberate movement. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded. I didn't sleep again that night. Every noise made me tense. Branches cracking, the soft scrape of leaves, the creak of the cabin floor. The hours dragged on. When dawn finally came, I went outside to check. The dirt was disturbed again, deeper this time. Bare footprints led from the treeline up to the porch, but none back. I packed my things quickly, but when I tried to start my car, it wouldn't turn over. My stomach sank. The battery cables were still in place, but one was loose, the bolt unscrewed. Someone had been here while I slept, close enough to my car to tamper with it. I could feel their presence even though no one was visible. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I walked along the dirt road, hoping to find a cell signal, but there was none. The forest around the cabin seemed different in daylight. It wasn't the peaceful isolation I had imagined. It was heavy, watchful, as if someone were still there, hidden among the trees. That night, I didn't light the stove or lantern. I sat in the dark, listening. Around midnight, the slow footsteps returned. They moved along the porch, careful, measured. Then I heard the faintest sound of breathing, just on the other side of the wall near my bed. My grip on the hatchet tightened. The breathing paused, then came again, slower this time. Minutes passed. Then the doorknob rattled. Once, twice, slow and deliberate. Someone was testing the door, seeing if it would open. I stayed perfectly still. After a moment, the movement stopped, and I heard the soft crunch of footsteps fading into the woods. I didn't sleep again. At sunrise, I packed what I could carry and left immediately, throwing my things into the car. I drove as fast as the dirt road would allow, glancing in the mirrors the whole way out. When I finally reached the paved highway and other cars, I felt a heavy relief wash over me. Later, I called the cabin owner and explained that I was leaving early. He didn't ask many questions. He only said, "Sometimes people don't like how quiet it gets out there." Weeks later, I read an article about a missing hiker who had disappeared near the same stretch of forest. His belongings were found near an abandoned cabin by the river, but no one ever located him. I haven't gone back since. Every time I hear rain hitting the windows or a branch cracking outside, I remember that cabin. The footprints leading up to the porch, the scraping of wood, the soft, controlled breathing right outside my wall. There was no ghost, no monster, just someone real, patient, and careful. They knew how far I was from help and how isolated the place was. The scariest part, the thing that stays with me, isn't that someone was out there. It's that they could watch me, circle the cabin, touch the car, and I never saw them. The forest was their advantage, and I was just a visitor. That weekend taught me something I'll never forget. Isolation isn't peaceful. It's a spotlight on how vulnerable you can be when no one is around to help. Even now, months later, I avoid cabins in the woods. Every time I see a dirt road leading into dense trees, I think about that weekend, the footsteps, the doorknob, the heavy silence, and I realize how close I came to something I don't even want to imagine. The cabin still exists somewhere in that forest, and so does the person who knows exactly how to watch from the shadows without being seen. It was in the middle of October when I decided to spend a weekend alone at a small cabin in the woods. I had been feeling drained for months, work, noise, people everywhere. I just needed quiet, some place where I could breathe and not hear anything but the wind and trees. A coworker told me about a small rental cabin his uncle owned, deep in the mountains of Colorado. No electricity, no service, no neighbors for miles. Sounded perfect. The drive there took most of the day. The last stretch was the roughest, an old dirt road that wound through thick pine forest, full of ruts and sharp turns. The trees were dense, tall enough to block out the sun in places. It was already late afternoon when I finally reached a clearing where the cabin sat. It was smaller than I imagined, made from dark logs with a tin roof and a small porch that sagged in the middle. The air smelled like wet wood and pine sap, and the only sound was the faint wind moving through the trees. Inside, the cabin was simple. One main room with a small bed pushed against the wall, a wood stove, a single table and a chair. A few shelves held some old tins, matches, and a lantern with half a tank of fuel. There was a small window above the bed that looked out toward the trees. Everything was coated with a thin layer of dust, but it was dry, not moldy. I dropped my bag by the door, unpacked my food, and started a small fire in the stove. By the time the sun set, the forest outside had gone silent. The kind of silence that feels thick, almost heavy. The light from the stove flickered across the walls, making shadows shift slowly. I sat by the window for a while, just listening. It was peaceful at first, but after a while, I realized how strange it felt to not hear a single bird or insect, just the occasional creak of wood from the cabin settling. That night, I couldn't sleep well. The bed was rough and smelled faintly of smoke. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound outside, a faint crunch, like someone stepping on dry pine needles. I froze and listened. It happened again, slower this time. Then silence. I held my breath for what felt like a minute before I finally convinced myself it was probably an animal. A deer, maybe. When I stepped outside the next morning, there were prints near the edge of the clearing. Human footprints, barefoot. The dirt was damp from the night air, so they were clear, 5 toes, a long foot, deep heel impressions. They led from the tree line toward the cabin, then back again. I stared at them for a long time. The air felt colder suddenly, even though the sun was out. I tried to brush it off. Maybe some hiker passed through, though I couldn't imagine anyone walking barefoot out here in the cold. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself, chopping firewood, walking near the stream that ran behind the cabin, reading an old paperback I'd brought. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. Every time I turned toward the woods, I thought I saw something move between the trees, just out of view. That evening, I cooked some canned soup on the stove and sat by the window again. The sun disappeared behind the trees fast, and soon everything outside turned black. I didn't light the lantern right away. I just sat in the dim orange glow of the fire, staring out at the darkness. Around 9, I saw something, faint, maybe 20 feet from the edge of the clearing. A small flicker like light reflecting off something metal. It disappeared as soon as I noticed it. The wind had picked up by then, brushing the branches against each other. I told myself it was nothing. Still, I locked the door, even though the old latch didn't feel secure. I laid down but kept my boots on, just in case. I must have fallen asleep sometime after midnight because the next thing I remember was waking up to a noise. It was soft at first, a slow dragging sound, like something being pulled through the dirt. Then I heard it again, closer this time, right outside the wall by the bed. My pulse started pounding in my ears. I held completely still, listening. Then came a faint tap against the wood. Just once. Then again. I reached for the lantern but stopped myself. I didn't want to make noise or light. I just lay there, barely breathing. After what felt like forever, the sound faded. I stayed awake until dawn, eyes open, listening to the silence that followed. When daylight came, I went outside immediately. The dirt near the back wall was disturbed. There were marks in the ground. 2 long trails like something had been dragged slowly through the soil. One led from the treeline up to the cabin wall, the other away from it. My stomach twisted as I followed them. About 20 yards away, the tracks stopped at a small pile of brush. Underneath the leaves were scraps of old cloth, dirty, torn fabric that looked like it had once been part of a shirt. The edges were stiff, dark with dried something. I didn't look too long. That's when I decided I wasn't staying another night. I went back inside, packed up my bag, and loaded it into the car. I tried to start the engine, but nothing happened. I tried again, just a clicking sound. I popped the hood, and my stomach dropped. The battery cables had been pulled loose. Not cut, not damaged, just unscrewed and laid neatly aside. Whoever was out there had been close enough to touch my car, maybe while I was inside sleeping. I reattached them as quickly as I could, constantly looking over my shoulder. The woods felt alive in a way they hadn't before, like they were hiding something. Once the car started, I drove down that dirt road as fast as I could manage. Every bump, every turn made me flinch. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again. At a small gas station miles away, I finally stopped to breathe. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what had happened. I told myself I just overreacted, that maybe someone had camped nearby and messed with the car as a prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The footprints, the tapping, the dragged lines in the dirt, it all pointed to something deliberate. Someone had been watching, someone who knew I was alone. A week after I got home, I looked up the area out of curiosity. There were a few mentions on local forums, people talking about things going missing near the old trail, stories of cabins being broken into while renters slept. Nothing official, but enough to make me realize it wasn't just in my head. Even now, months later, I can still picture those footprints. The bare feet in the cold mud, the neat, careful way the battery cables had been placed aside. Whoever it was didn't just stumble onto that cabin. They knew it was there. They'd been out there long enough to move quietly, to wait, to watch. Sometimes at night, when everything in my apartment is silent, I hear small creaks and think back to that sound on the cabin wall. The faint dragging, the slow tap. It's not ghosts that scare me anymore. It's the thought of someone real, someone who lives hidden in the woods, watching people like me come and go. Someone patient enough to wait until you're asleep before they step onto the porch. The cabin's still listed online, same photos, same description. I checked last week. But now, when I look at those pictures of the dark little clearing and the line of trees behind it, all I can think about is what was standing just beyond them that night, quiet, barefoot, and waiting for the light to go out.